Hello and welcome to the EnSpirit podcast, where we inspire you to develop and enhance your entrepreneurial talents and skills. This series is packed full of information, tips and interviews that help you change and find the edge in your game. I'm your host, Beju Solanki. I'm a performance psychologist and I've been working with entrepreneurs and business owners for the last 25 years, helping them improve their game. To find out more information about me, please look on all social media platforms, but specifically Clubhouse and Instagram. Before we launch this week's episode, I'd love to tell you about the Change Your Game scorecard. If you're struggling to achieve what you really want and you're not sure where to start, the Change Your Game scorecard will help you identify where you need to improve. Life is a game, and there are 3 core games you need to conquer to succeed in life. That's the inner game, your mindset, your emotions, your thoughts. Your game plan, that's your strategy and your roadmap. And then your outer game, how consistent and persistent you are in taking actions. The Change Your Game scorecard will help you identify how strong you are in each of those games. Please visit changeyourgamescorecard.com for more information and get your report today. Thank you for listening. Hi, and welcome to the next podcast. And Warren, how are you, my friend?
I'm bloody marvellous, Beju, thank you. Yeah, really, really good.
Good to hear, good to hear. And people know by now that we're recording all these podcasts during this time of this pandemic and lockdown, etc. And so we're doing this over Zoom. And how has this period been for you, briefly? It's been productive or different?
Actually, it's probably been the time in my life where I've enjoyed my work the most. So I appreciate, there's lots of horrible stuff going on in the world. I appreciate, and I'm not just talking pandemic, actually, there's a lot of divided people right now, a lot of different forces at play. However, from my work perspective, I've never been as connected to it, and I have had the privilege of working with people in multiple countries, which I don't think would have been an opportunity in normal circumstances, because everything we were doing was live and face to face. But the kind of virtual world and the virtual way of delivering coaching, mentoring, content has opened up a number of opportunities.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that, investigate more about that later on in our conversation. But I wanted to start off by understanding your journey. EnSpirit is all about how we help people develop their entrepreneurial mindsets, thinking, behaviors. And one of the greatest lessons is to understand other people's stories and their inspiration. We met first time at one of your events, a previous business of yours, Business Scene, where you ran networking events for entrepreneurs and business owners. That's where we met, probably 10 years ago now. But I would like to investigate, where did it all start? Did you come from corporate? Were you like an entrepreneur in the playground? Where did it start for you, Warren?
No, I tried, just to smile at it, I tried the corporate life once and failed miserably very quickly. So it was further validation that I was probably unemployable. No, for me, it started at a really young age. I was always quite happy to work hard for money. So as a kid, even at 13, I probably had 3 or 4 jobs on the go. And one or two things which were a bit more wheeler-dealery, like many people have got similar stories. But it started for me at the age of 17, dropping out of my A-levels after 1 year. And I was really struggling to focus on any of the content from the course. And at the time, I'd been running some kind of parties or maybe the early raves, and getting lots and lots of people turning up and paying money to come to them. And it was in dropping out, I got contacted by a nightclub in Swindon, which was called the Brunel Rooms. At the time, it was the biggest nightclub in southwest England. It's about 2,500 capacity nightclub. And they said, well, look, we've got an assistant manager job available. We've heard about the parties you've been doing. Do you want to come in for an interview? And my ultimate goal at that age was to own my own nightclub anyway. So this was like, oh my God, This has come early. And so I turned up for this interview. There's about 25 people going for the job, all experienced and all having done something in that field. And I turned up kind of fresh at 17. I wasn't even old enough to drink there, and I was being interviewed for the job.
Right.
And I remember being really quite cocky in the interview. for example, they asked questions like, "Do you have a driving license?" And I said, "No, I passed my test next Monday." It was
right, I like it.
It was just completely self-assured of what was gonna happen and what could come from it. And I think they thought, okay, he's got a bit of swagger. And they asked a few questions which were clearly the ones they cared the most about, which was, if the tills run out of money and a big fight breaks out in the nightclub, which do you deal with first?
Right.
And so you had to, on your feet, weigh up the scenario and answer the question. And so I got the call a day later to say, yeah, we'd like you to come and take the job. So now I'm 17. I passed my test on the Monday, like I said I would, and I'm working in this nightclub. So it was quite a transition because anybody who's formed close friendships at school and then left school and suddenly those friendships kind of disappear because suddenly you don't have the same things in common. It was kind of an interesting time because I felt a little bit isolated, but I was doing this thing which I was really excited about. But just to cut a long story short, it took about 11 and a half months for them to fire me for being a cocky little shit, which I absolutely was. And I very quickly looked back and thought, this has been a brilliant, valuable lesson. It really matters how you treat people. And so I'd already been fascinated with communication and with charisma and people who can hold a room, mainly because my example was my father, who was, whilst he was in the Air Force, he was always somebody that would light up a room and know everybody and be known by everybody, So he was a great example for a way to communicate with people. But at that age, I'd believed my own hype and I'd let it get to my head. So it was a really good grounding experience. And of course, then the first thing you need to do is get back up and find some work and bring some money in. And without overlaboring the beginning, because I'll just show it shows the bit of mindset, was that that particular same day I was dumped by my girlfriend. My best friend was hit by a car and I lost my job. Right, so it all happened in one day.
Wow.
And I remember speaking to my mum and she said, "You need to go and get a job. You need to go and get something to pay the bills. No hanging about."
Was the girlfriend thing related to losing the job, or was it completely separate?
No, it's completely different.
Right.
And anyway, on my drive home, I passed a building site and I pulled up onto the building site and I said to the guy, "Do you need any laborers? I will literally do anything. I'm not afraid of hard work." And the guy said, "No, but we do need a JCB forklift truck driver. Do you have a license?" And I said, "No, but if you give me an hour in the car park, I'll figure it out." And so back then he said, he laughed, he liked my cheek, he laughed and he said, "No, we need somebody with a license. We'll keep your name on record for any labouring jobs." But by the time I got home, there was, do you remember traditional landlines and voice answer phones, which is all we used then. I had an answer phone message saying, "Go on then, come back in, we'll see how you get on." So I spent my summer driving a forklift truck on a building site with music playing on my Sony Walkman back then. And the interesting thing was they had to pay me the proper rates in order to get it through on the books without it causing attention. So, back in the 1991, I was £500 a week driving a forklift truck and just feeling like I was.
Wow, you were earning $2,000 a month.
Just driving a forklift truck, which for me felt like just playing, And I only took out one house wall in that whole time. So.
That's anyway, very good. That's very good.
That's an indication into. I was always taught that we have to earn our keep. So the work ethic was always there.
Okay.
I just wish I had the focus when I was a younger man.
I see. So did you go to university, college? Was it just a question of working there after? Because I know you worked a little bit in a corporate career, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I eventually went back and did a part-time HND in business information technology, and that kind of led me into an IT career. Where I was running my own business, contracting, bringing in subcontractors, and then kind of retaining clients on support contracts and things like that. So for the 90s, I effectively ran an IT business after my summer of driving.
Right, I see. So you ran an IT business. That was your first business, your own venture?
Yes, first. The contract. It started in the contractor marketplace. So anybody who's listened to this who understands the contractor boom of the 90s would know what I mean. You needed to be a limited company,
Right.
But and most contractors just turned up, filled in their timesheet, did their work, and then left.
Right.
And it was, really kind of high fee work back then. And I was lucky; I was in a technology that was in big demand, but was actually quite simple, which worked for my low attention span.
I see.
And but no, what happened over the years is that I just retained clients here and there, and ended up, working on some really large projects with a team of people, and it was very lucrative. It was a very establishing decade, and I'm glad it happened when I was in my 20s.
Right. So we're living in an age now whereby, people know networking, they go to lots of events, and notwithstanding our current situation. And when I started my business back in 2007, I was introduced to this concept of business networking. But that was one of your first businesses, businessing, where I met you. I know you did some stuff before there. How did you come to the realization that there's a business around this concept of networking?
Well, so my first point, which I think might be useful for anybody listening who's looking to start a business, is that don't overthink it at the beginning, because what happens is businesses evolve. And they evolve based on the demands of your marketplace. So you can. I don't think actually I've started a business ever in my career where what it ended up being was what it started out to be. So there's always a bit of movement that happens when you create something, and certainly with Business Scene. Prior to Business Scene, it was an event management company, and so we were running quite large events. In fact, we did a £500,000 contract delivering Orange's Christmas parties for 12,000 members of staff across the UK. We ran some really big parties on the Isle of Wight as part of the yachting festival, Scandia Life back then with the sponsors. And so we did some really kind of big event related stuff. And the idea around Business Scene was I'd kind of discovered networking, particularly online networking, through the early days of Academy, which I think where we may have originally met.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Yes.
no, we met at one of my events actually. But
And then it was after. Then we realised we were members of Academy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So Academy was an online networking tool, and at the time they were looking for people to run regional events, and I saw the opportunity as a way of raising profile amongst the local business community. So on the very first event, we had about 130 people turn up, local business people, and of course I was the guy at the front of the room welcoming them, saying hello, and immediately known. So I saw the opportunity in profile, not just from attending networking events, but actually being the go-to person, because of course everybody's coming to you at events like that saying, who should I meet? Who do I need to be introduced to? And so it made a couple of things click in my head back then. And then I was lucky to actually meet some really cool people who properly taught me the value of relationships, and how they do really need to be nurtured and looked after. And of course, eventually the law of reciprocity kicks in.
So Business Scene lasted for a few years, but I know from being around you and being friends, you had lots of ups and downs. And what were some of the things that you learned with the challenges that you faced running that business?
So it was over a decade, Business Scene, and the ups and downs, you're quite right, are numerous. And seriously, the lessons were it's at times profound, right the way from attracting investment and dealing with shareholders to what happened. The ups were selling lots and lots of sponsorship and being kind of cash rich for a while. But there were many mistakes made, and the key thing with most of these things is to. I always love the saying, the past is for reference, not for residence. So always that we should always reflect on the things that have gone before, not beat ourselves up about them, but really extract the lesson. And so Business Scene was a perfect education, I think. Lots and lots of hires, some brilliant contacts made, some great credibility with big national brands. We worked with Microsoft, BlackBerry, Vodafone, O2, Santander, and many, many, many more. Actually, so all of that was really very establishing. But the biggest thing I think I came out of it with, in hindsight, was they say that one of the most successful things that businesses can do is fail quickly. And I think we took far too long to fail. So we over-labored Business Scene to a point where market was saturated. We hadn't put the the operational processes in place, and it just wasn't working. In fact, I was finding it easier to sell a £20,000 sponsorship package than I was a £180 membership fee. And when you're having to really labor the membership sales, it became one of these things that it just didn't work in the end. And,
did you stay in it because you were determined to not be wrong and wanted to make it work? What was the reason do you think you stayed in that scene more longer than you needed to?
I don't think it was one emotion, but I think pride was definitely one of the reasons. I think that stubbornness. We've spent 10 years putting all of this graft in. We can't just let it go cheaply. So there was probably a number of factors. But the biggest thing which I see in hindsight was that I wasn't enjoying it. And so I probably spent 5 years laboring a business that I wasn't enjoying. And if there's one thing which I'm really pleased I do with now is help people actually get connected to the purpose in their business and find the fun, and actually work with clients that they enjoy working with. So it's a joy to get out of bed for in the morning. So it's a completely, and I suppose that emphasis has come from the fact that I, in hindsight, reflect on the fact that I laboured something for 5 years. What
was the point you knew that was it? Did you stopped business in, whether you sold it or liquidated it or whatever? What was the point you knew? You woke up, no, I've got to stop this.
I think like most things, if I'm honest with myself, it was starting to impact family relationships. It was impacting friendships. I was probably grumpy more than I was upbeat and happy. So I think it's a number of different factors, but there comes a point when you just look at your bank balance and think, I'm worth more than this. I'm not enjoying this. I'm worth more than this. It's impacting loads of stuff beyond the business. So I need to go. And actually it was really quite liberating making that decision. It doesn't mean to say we just threw the towel in completely. So, like everything, when you do hit stumbling blocks along the way, what you don't lose is all of those relationships, all of those key assets to the business. So there was a whole ton of things that came out of it. And by actually just taking a slightly different approach, what we did was actually leverage all of the success of the past and turn it into something new and better, which is still running today.
I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. One of the disabling factors they have is this fear of failure, and then what failure means in terms of their credibility with other people. But you found that you weren't scared that this failure was going to mark you, and these relationships that you built up were going to be like, well, no, Warren, you're right. Thanks, but no thanks. But you felt they didn't judge you because business scene failed in inverted commas.
No, I've got to be honest, my friend. I suffer the same anxiety on these as every other human being on the planet does if they're honest with themselves. So I was worried about the perception of my peers, and certainly the people I respected and as peers, and it was pride that probably kept it all going. But what happens is, and I think this is something which age gives you a different perspective. Age gives you a maturity to look back and actually acknowledge where the lessons are. And as a man in my 20s and 30s, I was definitely somebody who tried to please too much. In my 40s, I give less of a shit. And in my 50s, I think it's probably going to go to an extreme the other way. But if I could encourage any younger person, it's to care less about the perception of other people. The only people you really should be worrying about are your team and your customers and your own happiness.
Because your perception is your perception. It might not be the truth. And
do you know what? What I learned was that I've got no control over what other people think of me. So all I can do is be true to myself. And if along the way some people don't like me, then so be it. There's plenty that do. And so, as I say, it took a maturity though to come to that conclusion.
But you picked yourself up. You didn't sort of go back to some sort of 6-figure job in the city and say, I don't want any of this. You picked yourself up and you went again. And what did you? Because you stayed in the entrepreneurial space. You stayed in this sort of space. And What did you learn from the business scene experience that allowed you to take your next business venture on?
Yeah, so I can't stress enough how much I think it's an evolution. Everything happens. Moving relationships on from what stood before. The business that followed business scene was still related. It was still taking all of those knowledge and skills. It was just packaged in a different way. And as I say, that business still runs today. So you never just chuck in the towel, you evolve.
Would you say is pivot a word, or is that too?
Well, pivot to me, I love the term pivot because obviously I used to play basketball in my youth, and pivot is that basketball term for.
Are you tall enough?
In the kind of middle class white England where I was actually one of the tallest.
Good answer.
But actually, then was largely overtaken by people. But it's one of those things. So what ended up happening was I don't think evolution is pivot necessarily. I think because pivot to me suggests a completely different change of direction. I think actually what happens is that you take all that you've learned, all that you've done, and you find a different way of delivering value and hope that works. And what actually happens, like I read some research recently which was suggesting that over the next 20 odd years, they expect most people to have portfolio careers. So therefore multiple income streams that come from multiple different hustles, as it were. But I actually think that's been a quite common thing in the certainly in the SME entrepreneur space for quite some time. I don't think I've ever had just one income stream. I've always had various income streams. So even in the early days of business scene, I was asked to speak for the very first time in 2004, 2005, and got a real thrill from doing it. But from people in the audience, I got asked to speak at 2 other events. One of them was fee paying. So suddenly it was, there's an opportunity to get paid here. And I didn't take that particularly seriously for many years. But of course, I've really grown into that. And a professional speaker is definitely part of my portfolio now. So yeah, it goes in different directions.
Because you created
pause there a second, Beju. My wife's trying to get into the room.
Hang on, let me just right. Okay, you do what you need to do. That's fine.
Yep.
We'll pause
Janet, come on through.
So you took that knowledge and you said, right, the evolution of not only your thinking but how you can apply that to the market, and you founded Advantage Business and then Champions of Small Business. So you're still in that space of being this catalyst, mentor, instigator for other small businesses. Yeah.
So and this is where I've greatly admired your tenacity in this space, Beju. I think your branding's on point. I think what you're doing with this podcast is, I've listened to a couple of the episodes. I think it's really, really cool stuff. But I'm sure you'll agree with me. It takes tenacity to turn these things into anything meaningful. And what I didn't want to do was to leave the space altogether. But if I was honest with myself, what I started to find was that my real peaked interest came into honed aspects of entrepreneurship, not running membership as a whole. I actually like my favorite thing from business scene was the meaningful relationships. It was the deeper relationships. It was the people that actually wanted your help at a deeper level, and therefore it was so much more satisfying helping them because they'd stepped up and said, "Can you help?" So actually, what I have eventually ended up doing is helping people who want to make a difference. They're running businesses, they want to make a difference. So I'm not only connected to my purpose, I'm helping them connect to theirs. So that's come from this 15, 20-year journey, and it's all moved towards a particular goal and to an end bit. And this is why I fully understood the saying that it's not the destination, it's the journey that counts, because I'm actually enjoying the journey now. It's taken me a long time to enjoy it as much. And I'm less concerned about the destination because I'm actually really enjoying what I'm doing. In fact, if I spent the rest of my days doing what I'm doing now, I'd actually be a happy man. I know I would, because it's varied and it's interesting and it's meaningful.
And that's linked to, you wrote a book called Influence, and that's linked to, you talk a lot about, as you mentioned, you're a professional speaker as part of your portfolio. You talk a lot about the power of influence, but the power of credibility and association, and I think there's a lot to be said. And we're not talking about the Instagram million follower influencers. We're talking about there's a different type of credibility that you really focus on and help other entrepreneurs and thought leaders develop. Do you want to elaborate a bit about that and where that lies for you?
Yeah, so just to touch on the book, the book was actually written as a. I didn't necessarily want to write a book. Just to be clear, I was approached by a couple of different publishers asking me to write a book, and I knew it would be a really big ask for me because of the attention span thing that I talked about earlier on. I knew it would be difficult, and I reluctantly said yes when one of them stroked my ego enough, and so I was blatantly seduced by the kind of ego stroking, and reluctantly said yes. And actually, it was one of the best things I could have ever done. It did a load of things for authority, credibility, etc. But because I had to really go and research my topic in more depth in order to validate my philosophy, what happened was I really deepened my own knowledge. In hindsight, it was the biggest benefit of doing it. Don't get me wrong, it had loads of kind of commercial benefits for speaker fees and speaker demand, etc., etc. But the biggest value to me was it really deepened my knowledge on my own subject. And it also led me down a slightly different rabbit hole. So when people ask, why did you write a book called Influence, when there's How to Win Friends and Influence People and Influence the Psychology of Persuasion, both awesome books that I recommend everybody reads, but they were written in the 1930s and the 1980s, pre-internet. So we're now in this obviously digital age, and what I wanted to do was kind of take those proved, tried and tested concepts and give them an application for, say, digital marketing or personal brand building. So it was written from that perspective. And therefore, it was written a little bit more generally for anybody who might be starting a business and looking to put their head above the parapet and build a bit of personal recognition and personal branding. What's actually happened, though, since then is that I started to hone in on specifically speakers, consultants, coaches, mentors, etc., who are in a kind of thought leadership space. They are in some way they are commoditizing what they know. They are productizing what they know, and so what they need to do is obviously build a personal brand that's congruent with their values, with their sense of purpose, which really nails their positioning to their target marketplace. So they're solving a problem, so they've got a great value proposition, and then how to take that to market. And again, it's an evolution. Last year, I was working with speakers just in a mastermind context, but I could see the help that was needed for different people at different stages. So I started to develop and evolve a kind of model, a methodology for helping people. And then it was earlier this year, pre-lockdown, when I was sat with Warren Knight at one of the big industry conferences. And Warren and I have known each other for probably 10 years, but not really taken the time to have a proper conversation with each other. We passed each other. We're both on keynote stages at various business events. We kind of passed each other in the hallway and then stood on stage and done our stuff. So at this particular time, we sat down and talked. And what was interesting was where I look back now and I can see what actually happened is we were drawn to each other through shared values. And for just one of the stories. And then what actually happened was that realization that actually what you do is the missing piece to what I do and vice versa. So what we created was something called the Thought Leaders Blueprint. And it's a really comprehensive 8-week accelerator. There are other things from workshops to webinars to the masterminding. But what it really is, it's a foundation for anybody that's looking to take a thought leadership type of business to market. And it's quite intense. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's the idea is that you come through the 8 weeks ready to go to market, already starting to win business.
What would you say are some of the mistakes that entrepreneurs make that they want to try and position themselves as? Because you talk a lot about credibility and also influence by association.
Yeah, so
I read one of your posts a few weeks ago about being prepared and stuff. So
so credibility by association is a principle that I talk about in the book, which is essentially the principle that we're known by the company we keep. It's the principle that if we form the right strategic partnerships and the right strategic relationships, and we have to be worthy ourselves, by the way. You can't just hold on to people's coattails and expect that to be a sustainable way of grabbing influence. You've got to do something worthy too. But in terms of a way of fast tracking, credibility by association is a really powerful principle. So in the blog, I think you read the other day, I told a story from way back in 2003, 2004, when I started the event management business. And I had already been exposed to a knowledgepreneur called Jack Black, not the actor, a really charismatic Glaswegian NLP kind of personal development guy. And my enthusiasm for his stuff made me pick up the phone and say, "Love your stuff, we should do something." So the naivety of youth, hey? And he said, "Well, come and meet me then. I'm in Glasgow." So I jumped on a flight from EasyJet in Bristol, and I got to Glasgow first thing in the morning. And he turned up, and we met at the hotel right next to the airport. And he turned up, and we sat. And I immediately realized that I was unprepared for that meeting. Right. Because when he said, "Tell me what you want to get from this meeting," I kind of went, "Oh, well, I don't know, really. I've come with a bit of an open mind to see what could happen." Right. And I could see the eyes roll in the back of his head. And but bless him, he still gave me some time, and he gave me the ingredients for what I needed to do if I wanted to do anything meaningful with somebody moving forwards. And I've never since turned up at a meeting where I haven't at least thought about what the outcome might be. So that was a quick deviation from the question, because it was Jack that really taught me this principle of credibility by association. Because when he started his business, he had been working as a social worker in Glasgow for quite a lot of his early youth, and but been a real keen enthusiast into kind of personal development. And had started developing his own content. So when he launched himself, he had the testicular fortitude to take on a £10,000 loan and hire Sir John Harvey Jones to come and stand on stage next to him in Glasgow in front of 2,000 Glaswegian business owners. And overnight, he was the business guru that works with Sir John Harvey Jones. Wow. So whilst it was a one-off speaking gig, he was clever enough to know that, hey, A, he'd be a draw, and B, he would then be the guy on stage, and it would fast track relationships and influence with this particular audience. And I was really wowed by this story when he told me. I thought, wow, that's really insightful and really impressive. And anyway, he went on to build a very successful business, several million turnover business. And the point I was going to make was tying it back to the airport, is when he left me at the airport, and I had now 6 or 7 hours to kill before my return flight. Within 5 minutes, somebody came up to me and said, "Sorry, excuse me for interrupting. I can't help but notice you were just talking to Jack Black. Can I buy you a coffee?" Oh, wow. That person not only had a coffee with me, we had lunch together. And it turned out he was on the same flight back to Bristol. So we sat next to each other and we talked the whole time. And 2 weeks later, we did business together. And that's another example of credibility by association. But that's also... Go on, sorry.
That's also an example of not being attached to the outcome. You've got to allow the ripples of the universe occur. So what did Alan say once? Success is 99% turning up and 1% perspiration or something. So you turned up.
So I largely agree with that. Serendipity has been very kind to me over the years, but I've got to say I've got my best results when I've done things on and with purpose. So by all means, allow serendipity to play a part, but actually have a game plan at least. Yeah. And then of course, once you're clear on what it is you're looking for, typically you tend to spot them because they're front of mind, right?
When you think about your whole journey, going back from when you were an IT contractor to doing business scene and what you're doing now, apart from your family and your kids, what you're most proud of?
Oh, that's a big question. And what I wouldn't want to do is just throw out some kind of churlish answer. I think it's not the big things, it's the small things. So, in a particular year, I think we in 1 year we did over £600,000 worth of sponsorship. Landing big clients and big contracts were things which were, nice pat on the back moments. But the bits that I'm most proud of is when the one-man band comes up to you and says, "Thanks to something you told me, I've just won a year's worth of business, which pays for my kids' school fees or pays the mortgage." It's the small things when you can see actually the difference you make to individuals that I think I'm most proud of. I think I'm proud of the friendships that I've made and the people that have been involved in the business. It's not about, I'm less ambitious than I certainly was 20 years ago. I don't particularly want to be a multi-millionaire now. I actually want to be happy more than I want to be a multi-millionaire.
Do you remember that throwaway, well, it might have been not a throwaway comment, but sort of an off-the-cuff comment you made to me at one of your networking events that instigated...
I dread to hear what that is.
Well, that was a catalyst to launching my first book. Because you remember, I did these interviews with people that we know, Thomas Power, Brad Burt, and all these other people, where I wanted to probably do a podcast then where I was going to release interviews and find their journeys. And you said, well, if you've got all of this content, why don't you transcribe it, put your opinion on what you learned from their lessons and turn it into a book?
I do remember that conversation.
And that book, I'm an Entrepreneur, Get Me Out of It, which was going to be a series of audios, was published as my first book.
And it's proudly on my shelf.
Yeah, and you're in the credits there. So absolutely, and that was and since then I've written 3 others, which is obviously Change Your Game is my latest one, and writing the next one. So like you say, those little throwaway comments that we all make change people's lives. Those small ones, those small little things.
I don't think we realise the impact we have on other human beings. I'm talking this about everybody, by the way, and that's both in the positive and the negative. So if you're that person who, when somebody tells you their passionate business idea that says, "Oh, it'll never work," or immediately throws kind of cloud on it, stop being that person. But you can give constructive feedback to people. You can enable them rather than pull them down. But I'm quite proud to say that people like you who I've met along the way, and certainly what I hope to be, is that whilst yes, sometimes it's tough love, it's always with the point of view of helping them get better and be more.
Absolutely, and sometimes we forget that we were in our journey at a point where we didn't know what we know now about building relationships, about certain ways to have a mindset. And so when we come across someone who's start their journey, we might say something that's obvious to us, but for them it's like, oh, wow, that's a game changer for me. I never thought about it in that way. And we need to give ourselves that much more credit. What we mentioned at the start, we're recording this during this COVID period and during the lockdown. What has this period where people have had to reassess how they work and what they do, what has this period given you?
So it's given me perspective. I think most people, if they're human, will can't help but be moved by some of the stories that we're hearing from around the world. But I also, it's given me optimism in some of the examples of kindness. So, for example, one of my biggest clients is EnSpirit, who produce QuickBooks, the accounting software. And so I've spoken at their events in San Jose and London and what have you. And when the world gets back to normality, hopefully they're kind of Sydney and Toronto events too. If you're watching from QuickBooks, that was a quick nudge.
Or even listening.
But actually, one of my favorite people in the world from EnSpirit, in fact, she's just left recently, was telling me the story about where their HQ is in San Jose. And they have a small sandwich shop, family-owned sandwich shop. It's been there for years. All of the staff used to go there for their lunch. Effectively, it was that popular. The owners were known to them. They were personalities in their own right and were known to them. And of course, when lockdown happened, there were businesses like that all over the place that are just going out of business, disappearing. And one of the directors from EnSpirit went into this particular sandwich shop and said to the owner, how are things going? What does it look like for you? And he said, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we'll be here in 3 weeks' time. And that was the story. And so he immediately went back and set up a crowd fund and sent it to all of the staff in the office. And they all collectively chipped in to pay this guy's bills for several months.
Wow.
And it's stories like that which really I find quite inspiring. And then I look also at the people who show agility. So a really dear friend of mine who I think you know, Tom Ball.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Tom,
the rooms, was it the
Desk
office?
Desk Lodge. So he runs a couple of serviced offices, and Tom is a really talented entrepreneur, really engaging guy. And he started this business, which is serviced offices in various different places in the UK, all with really kind of a groovy theme-based environments. So you could be sat in a meeting room completely made of Lego, and then the next one you're in Narnia or something. You know, it's a bit out there, but it's really engaging, right? And of course, the main part of his business was paid by bigger companies paying rent for office space all year round. And of course, what happened is lockdown hit, and suddenly organizations realized that they were going to have to let people work from home. But not only that, they realized the work was getting done, and suddenly they can trust people to work from home. Well, game-changing stuff, because there are businesses I know that will never go back to an office because they've learned to do things virtually. And what's actually happened is, you know, staff are happier because they've got work-life balance. They don't have a 2-hour commute. All of these other things that go on. But the interesting kind of addition to that is they then suddenly started to realize that they were missing the human interaction. So collaboration wasn't quite as good as it was before because they weren't in the same room thrashing out a project. And so Tom recognized this, and clients that had left him for good suddenly were inquiring, could we have our office space for a day or two a week? And he recognized this. And so what he did was he made space available for companies that just want to jump in and co-locate for a day a week or a couple of days a month. And in that time, they do all of their big kind of collaboration meetings. And so that's agility, that's adapting. It's not pivoting. I wouldn't say it's pivoting because he's not gone into a new profession. He's just changed the way he delivers what he delivered before, and to be relevant to the marketplace. And you know, if anybody's listening to this who is hitting any kind of obstacle or difficulty within their business over the last 6 to 8 months, you know, what you need to do is to come back to the table with your value proposition. So if anyone's ever seen the value proposition canvas, it's very much about looking at what customers do and looking at where they're in pain and where there's potential gains for them. And that's observation. And then coming over to solutions, which is by design. And that's the simple value proposition is design the solutions to your customers' problems or potential gains. And the world has changed for them too. So if I advise you to do anything, is to open your eyes and really look at how your marketplace has been impacted. Have a look at the challenges that they face now. Have a look at the things which they perhaps don't know about, but leveraging technology now, they could make gains in efficiency or even change their marketplace. And if you can design that and deliver that, that's a perfect place to be in the current climate.
I like that. You've been in business, as I say, over 10, 15 years now. You've run a business through the last recession. God knows what's going to happen economically over the next few months. You mentioned that there's this realization by corporate companies that working from home is actually not a bad thing. They can save a lot and they're getting productivity. What do you see the landscape of business looking like over the next few years during the end of this, hopefully the pandemic and post?
Well, I don't think it's ever going to go back to the way it was. I think. Do you know what? I'm not informed enough to completely predict what the future looks like, but I think it's going to be more of the same. I think you're gonna get a kind of boom in businesses that are you know, when confidence is properly back, you're going to get a boom in businesses that are wanting to bring people together so they can actually feel connected again. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be an all year round thing. I think you know there's we already have seen over the last 20 years a trend towards access, not ownership. think of the age of the app, and that has largely come down to knowledge as much as some of the physical stuff. But I can see it just being an accelerated version of more of the same. I think where we were eventually going to end up anyway, we're just going to get there quicker because we've had this big injection of adrenaline to, and it's been necessary to adapt. We've got no choice in the matter, But I don't think this is going to be solved by middle of next year. I think we are going to be working differently for several years to come.
I can see that as well. You're very much in the digital space, and you like you mentioned that some of the programs you run. Is that I think this has allowed the digital space to accelerate. We're doing things now that potentially, if we didn't have the pandemic, would be happening in 2-3 years' time, because people realize that we have to use digital assets in a way that's compulsory now, not as desirable.
So there's a couple of points I want to make on that. So first of all, I'm not so sure it's massively accelerated, but it has meant that those which were lagging behind have had to catch up, because they've got their traditional marketing isn't going to work. Turning up and cold calling, for example, isn't going to work in current landscape because nobody gets out of the house. So I think it's forced a lot of people to try and catch up as quickly as possible. And those that haven't understood it or haven't had the inclination of I've seen a lot of people just retire or fold, But what's interesting right now is that the marketplace is flooded with insight. There's so many people who have an opinion or content that they are pushing to the marketplace. What's happened is that people are less receptive to it. So I'll give you an example. Early days of lockdown, when Warren and I did a webinar, we would have hundreds of people register, hundreds of people turn up, and it was really cool. And like everybody else now, those numbers have come down and come down and come down over the course of lockdown, because people are kind of fatigued. It's information overload. But I did read some recent research, which my good friend Barnaby Winter shared with me, which was done by Gartner. And it showed that actually in an age of information overload, it's not the people with insight that are winning. It's the people who are making sense of insight that are winning. The people who are more likely to be holding your hand to deliver something, they're the ones that are winning. And so that's quite interesting, because if you think of it in the context of what I do, and that's help people with knowledge and thought leadership, they need to go that step beyond just telling them stuff. They need to be talking in a language that's simple and it's understood. They need to give them the kind of practical ways in which they can implement said knowledge. And in their kind of premium products, they need to be holding their hands and doing it with them. So that was quite an interesting insight, and it's kind of changed the way that we think about positioning what we share.
And I can see the power in that as well. And when you think about people are spending more time online on their phones because there's nothing else really to do, and I can really relate to that, whereby it's the interpretation of those insights that are going to get people your attention. Warren, it's been fascinating talking to you. There's lots more to talk about. I'm sure in season 2 we can talk more about what you're currently doing in terms of your thought leadership space. If people want to know more about you, Warren, and get hold of you, where can they contact you?
Well, there's a couple of things. If they're just interested in connecting with me, then warrencast.com works, and that's more geared towards my speaking. But if they're interested in the work I'm doing with Warren Knight around building personal brand and thought leadership, they can go to thoughtleadersblueprint.com.
Perfect, great. Warren, I wish you well. Good luck in your future ventures, and delighted to speaking to you today. Finally, we got you into the calendar, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon.
Beju, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to your audience, but well done for everything you're doing, mate. Keep on doing what you're doing.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Take care, Warren.
Buddy, take care.
Bye. Thank you for listening. To find out more about myself or the Change Your Game Scorecard, you can visit changeyourgamescorecard.com, where you can find out how strong your game is and get a full detailed report. Also, if you found this episode useful, please do leave a rating or a review in iTunes to help others discover it too. Until the next time, my name is Beju Slanky.